This is Grafted Together with ACSI Chief Ministry Officer Jerry Nelson.
Christian education, the very words themselves suggest that it is a particular type of education. And if you talk to many Christian educators, they believe that the type of education that we administer is supposed to be deeply transformative. We agree in principle that things are supposed to be transformative. But how do we go about ensuring that transformation takes place in our Christian schools? What separates Christian education from, say, public or any other type of private education? Is it simply our chapel, our small groups, our Bible verses on our walls or on our websites? Or is there something fundamentally different? Again, what is supposed to be different? Well, I've been extremely encouraged, especially over the last 25 years, with the resurgence of individuals who are asking these profoundly important questions about what truly constitutes a distinctly Christian education. And much of the focus has been on examining not only what teachers do in the classroom or their level of preparation, but also the type of curriculum we are administering in our schools. These schools are taking the lead, I believe, in re-examining every aspect of their educational practices through a biblical lens, from admissions to athletics to fine arts, theater, science classes, and beyond. And again, while there is a resurgence, there's still a lot of misunderstanding and uncertainty about how to effectively do this. So as the global landscape evolves, Christians, I believe, have an opportunity to clarify their understanding of Christian education's purpose and the function within this new paradigm. This could be a window of opportunity that very well may close rapidly, depending on one's location in the world. But if we truly perceive that we have a window of opportunity in this ever-shifting landscape, then I believe Christians truly have the answer. We truly can be the light. We truly can show and demonstrate to the world through our deeply biblical and truly and authentically Christian practices that we know for certain what is true, what is good, and what is beautiful, and that would manifest in everything that we do in our schools, and that we would truly be the light that Jesus Christ expects us to be. One of our main goals at ACSI is to herald the belief that Christian education is in the business of spiritual formation. Therefore, spiritual formation is what matters most. And so if you're not a part of our growing spiritual formation network, you are missing out. In our last and final meeting for this school year, we had the opportunity to hear from Dr. Milton Gonzalez, Executive Director at Covenant Christian Academy in McAllen, Texas, who walked us through the last phase of the spiritual formation journey map on how to equip teachers and leaders on how to prepare for and respond to crisis. So to gain access to these past recordings and all of the other recordings, go to acsi.org/spiritual formation and click on the Join the Network tab to connect with spiritual formation ambassadors around the world and get access to this information. So joining me on the podcast today is a good friend, Dr. Nathan Johnson, who is the head of school at Charleston Bilingual Academy and also serves on the board of the Association of Christian Schools International, ACSI. A 2001 graduate of Furman University with a Bachelor's of Arts in History and Secondary Education, he went on to earn his Master's in Education from Columbia International University and holds an education doctorate from Vanderbilt University, where his research focused on building world-class schools within diverse urban contexts. And drawing on his academic work, cross-cultural experience, and passion for bridging cultures through the love of Christ, Nathan founded Charleston Bilingual Academy. And the school's mission is to partner with parents to inspire world changers through Christ-centered, intercultural, language immersion education. And Nate is a thought leader par excellence. Now, he wouldn't tell you that himself, but I know that firsthand, and I can tell you his love for Jesus bursts forth in every conversation we've had over the years. So, Nate, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, good morning. Buenos dias. Ni hao, Jerry. I'm so happy to be here with you today.
Well, man, it's so good, and I lamented when we first got on that, man, we I don't think we're having enough conversations together because every time we get together, I always feel sharpened, inspired, and equipped, and I know you're going to do that very same thing for our listeners today. So, man, I'd love for our listener. I never want to assume that our listeners know who I have on the podcast, so. Man, tell us a little bit about your background and your story, how you became to the story behind you becoming
Yeah.
the starting Charleston Bilingual Academy, and yeah, talk to us.
I'm grateful and honored, and I hope what comes across is just proclaiming Jesus as the great hero of this story. To go backwards a little bit, I was the baby of three boys. I'm ultra competitive, and I had a prayer warrior for a mama. When I chose to go to Furman, which you mentioned, it was the only university I applied to because my middle brother had gone there and his life had been radically transformed for Jesus through a discipleship-based ministry called Campus Outreach. And I just said, I'm not sure what that is, but that's what I want.
Wow.
And I'm very grateful for the discipleship opportunities I had there. And simultaneously, my eyes are really open to the immigrant Hispanic population in Greenville, South Carolina. And it really started to pierce me for just the marginalization of the people there. And I ended up going to education primarily because I wanted to be a missionary, and I saw that as an open door to closed countries. And so went in education, served for a year at my alma mater, Dorman High School in Spartanburg, but then went overseas for 7 out of 8 years to an international Christian school in Caracas, Venezuela. 6 of those 7 years actually led the school, and during that time found my own Venezuelan princess. We got married, and fast forward, we have four criollitos, little Venezuelans. Actually, they're not too little anymore in our house that I deeply love. And then we during that time of leading this school, my my therapy and wonderful training came from Columbia International University. And honestly, besides my 4-year-old preschool, that's my only Christian schooling experience. And I really don't want to talk about my 4-year-old preschool experience because it was very distasteful. I still remember the legalist flavor to that school. CIU
Mm,
was the opposite experience, and my eyes were opened to what Christian education could be.
mhm.
Now, when I went to Venezuela, that was also a Christian school, and I actually remember my first year there as a teacher deciding, I don't think I'm made for Christian education. I felt like the students knew more Bible than me and had really hard hearts.
Mm.
But when I was allowed to come back and lead the school and simultaneously go to CIU, that began in 2004 a journey that I think we're going to unpack here today of the last 22 years of envisioning what could Christian education be. And I think ultimately, my deep desire is for these kids day in and day out, through every content, through each teacher, see Jesus as the pearl of great price. And
Yeah.
so when they leave our schools and go into the world, and the world tries to tempt them away, that they would say, "Why would I leave the pearl of great price for 5 minutes of pleasure? That's
Yeah.
stupid." And
Yeah.
so, yeah, the ultimate goal is just leading kids to treasure the triune God through 16,000 hours of Christ-centered education.
I love it. I want to go back to, I'm always intrigued by those transformative moments. I just heard a presentation at our recent FSI by Michael Lindsay, and I believe he calls them hinge moments, right? Those moments in time that really help define who you are. So clearly, when you had an opportunity to lead and you began your studies at Columbia International University, there was something that was transformative that led you on that path. Was it a particular class? Was it a particular professor? Was it an
Yeah,
encounter with a book or a paragraph that you
yeah,
read? What was it?
yeah. Yeah, oh, I love how Dr. Lindsay talks about the hinge moments. I don't want to dismiss so many amazing things at CIU. I think what I would highlight is Dr. Mill Ecker let me stay in his home for 4 summers. So
Wow.
I'm eating Mrs. Ecker's blueberry peach cake. She's packing me lunches every day. Our conversations around the dinner table every night were insane, and I think it was discipleship. It was life on life. It was taking the academic, learning from the day, and then just really in friendship form, hashing it out. What does that look practically in the
Yeah.
school setting?
Yeah. And I'm always amazed. The reason I like asking that question, because anecdotally, I know I can trace back. Like if there's someone who seems like they've been deeply transformed, it usually traces back to, it's like who was it that made, as you said, man, Jesus Christ, the pearl of, what did you call it, the pearl of great price, or
Yeah,
what was that, what it
yeah,
is?
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What was there a burning question that you had? I know you talked about the general, but sometimes I can tell you in my own journey, one of the questions that really kind of sparked me along the way was, I know the church is called to make disciples, but what's the Christian school supposed to do
Mm,
in relation to the church? And
mm,
so my pastor and I, we were on that journey because the school that I led was a church-sponsored school. And so he had come out of an experience where he was frustrated because you probably heard this before, the tail was wagging the dog, and he's like, something's fundamentally broken. And so I'm still on that journey of really trying to define the relationship between the church and the school. And where I've landed, obviously, is, the church is the bride of Christ. The school has a great responsibility to support the
yeah.
bride. So that's where I've landed.
Yeah.
But was there a burning question for you that you were trying to get at or answer that was being answered for you?
Yeah, no, man, great questions. I'd like to speak quickly to the school and church relationship, but then go deeper into a question God was forming in me as I'm encountering hard hearts in a Christ-centered school.
Mhm.
I will say my relationship with campus outreach was it was a ministry of the local church, and it's led me to always love the local church. And a big part of my testimony is by being involved in the local church, that my faith has always been greater than myself. It's about the
Mhm.
body that I'm surrounded in. And so our school, while we're not owned by a local church, we partner with local churches. Our campuses are their campuses, and we're very clear we're a ministry of theirs. We don't want to be a parachurch ministry. Um, because it provides so much more the holistic discipleship not just in school, but their whole lives, their families, the counseling, the discipleship, the teaching it provides, which I think
Mhm.
drives me back to this. You asked me about this burning question. So I taught for a year at this Christian school in Venezuela, returned to my sending church in Mitchell Road Presbyterian in Greenville, helped start a Hispanic ministry there. But then God took me back to the same school, which was surprising and mainly motivated by that Venezuelan princess I mentioned before. God uses all things for his glory, no judgment, judgment-free zone here. I get back to Venezuela and they hired me as an interim head of school, but things changed to where I ended up being it for 6 years. I was just like, but it doesn't have to be this way. It doesn't
Mhm.
have to be just because you teach the Bible, kids know a lot and have hard hearts. So I think that was the burning question. I remember that first year I went with them on this traditional yearly trip for the kids who could afford it,
Mhm.
to a Virgin Island off of the Venezuelan coast where they did this archaeological dig. And you can't draft up something more like paradise, right?
Mhm.
And the kids are complaining the whole time. And I'm like, are you kidding me? And I remember just praying, like, Lord, can we change this? And just praying, not knowing what that would be. And a lot of missionaries had their kids in our school. And months later, a missionary talks about how their church supports this Venezuelan who's a missionary to the unreached Warao people group on the
Mhm.
Orinoco River. And I'm like, yes. Yes, let's take our seniors, not just those who are going to afford, our seniors on that trip. Jerry, I've got stories. I've got miraculous story. I've got stories that we'll need to do another podcast of how
Yes.
God showed up. And this was the most lethargic uh, senior class. They did not care. And there was revival that week and some scary things that happened, and all for the glory of Jesus. And I think that was a burning question that maybe he started to answer of there's these two sides to the Christian education coin. Yes, there's great theological teaching and life on life discipleship, but then you've got to employ their hands and feet to go be the love of Christ
Yeah.
to the community and to reach others. And I think that was a piece that these 12th graders who've been there forever, their hearts started to break as they started to engage with this marginalized, struggling people group who desperately wanted the hope of Jesus Christ.
Yeah. Yeah. And if I were to summarize what you're saying, there's a difference between information and transformation.
There you go.
There's a Yeah, there's a fundamental difference, and it's again, yeah, we probably need to do another podcast on just the transformative power of missions trips led by people who really love Jesus. Because I remember 2004, our youth pastor, we did probably one of the most ambitious missions trip to Talamanca, Costa Rica. And
Okay.
what we didn't realize, it was one of those, where we went, it looked like we were in a real survivor, type of situation where we took a bus from the main city. We took it to a fast moving river, and it was about 35, 40 of us. We had to cross the river with all of our generators, electricity, and boats. Now,
Come
here
on.
you talk about miraculous. Well, when we got back, we heard back from the locals. They said, and it was dusk, so it was getting dark. But we heard from the locals, like, yeah, those waters are infested with alligators. And I was like, boy, I was like,
Oh man.
you talk about miracles upon miracles, because
Yes.
something could have gone wrong. But to your point, I remember, and I was much older then, but I remember the younger folks who went on that trip. They were deeply transformed
Yes.
by that experience, because number one, they're getting out of their comfort zone. Our youth pastor did an exceptional job of really framing why we're
Yeah.
here, of really making sure we understood the connection between, okay, this is what we believe. Now, here's an example of how we're going to translate what we believe into what we
Yeah.
do. This is love of neighbor in action. So, man, I love that. Let's fast forward a bit. I mean, obviously God has placed on your heart a desire, and we read it in the bio, to really put your faith into action. And so
Yeah.
you finish at international school. What was the period of time? How did you know when God was calling you, or what happened that God was calling you to start your own school? Describe
Oh
that
man.
connection, that
Yeah.
journey there.
Let me reiterate. Jesus is the only hero of this story. I hope that's the one thing that comes across. So I come back to the States from Venezuela and started work as a principal in a wonderful Christian school. And simultaneously, I wanted to pursue my doctorate. That's why we came back, and it was a dream of mine to study at Vanderbilt. So I traveled to Nashville 54 times over 3 years. And I find myself in my second semester realizing premise of the entire program is finding ways to strategically mitigate what we call the academic achievement gap. That
Hmm.
there's statistical, clear, significant gaps between socioeconomic statuses and races. So
Yeah.
basically, the overall trends are middle and upper class white children far outperform lower socioeconomic students of color.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, I didn't know that was the main premise of this program, because I'm going back every week to a school that is 99% wealthy white. And
Mm,
so part of me is like, maybe I got into the wrong program, but they're the spirit stirring my story. Each of us have our own stories and our own callings. In my story, he's stirring, but it doesn't have to be that way. And
yeah.
started to re-envision more what could Christian education look like? And then I get into this course on understanding why over 50% of Hispanic children do not graduate from high school. And now this is connecting me back to Venezuela, it's connecting me to my heart in my collegiate studies and realizing that there are strategies. And
Mm,
really the salient strategy coming out of research is a bilingual school, because what happens is
mm,
children who come from Spanish speaking homes struggle initially in an English speaking school. And so their confidence is lost. They're tracked often into special needs tracking. And yeah, of course they quit by ninth grade because they can go make $20 an hour and versus just struggle with school.
yeah.
Versus if you help them master their first language, then they transfer that knowledge to a second language, successfully mastering both. And at the same time, being positioned as leaders in a bilingual school, because they're not the one who's just struggling half the day, they're the ones leading. And it changes the paradigm for them at those pivotal early ages.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, understanding bilingual education, having a reference in my school in Venezuela, it was an American school, but for international students. So, a common student might be Korean, speaks Korean at home like he was born in Korea,
Right.
speaks Spanish like he was born in Venezuela, and speaks good old American English at our school. And just thinking, wow, Jerry, these third graders are smarter than me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so there's these different seeds in my story that's now being watered. And God then took me on a path. I actually left that school to be part of a curriculum startup company. Another story for another day. It dissolved. And so I graduate in April with my doctorate. And by June, I'm unemployed. And
Wow.
this I don't want to miss this part of the story because uh, it is extremely emasculating for a
Mm,
man who we just got a contract on a house, have two little tykes, another one
mm,
on the way, and I'm unemployed.
mm,
And in the season of looking for work, and man, desperate prayers, like sometimes
mm,
saying the same thing 1,000 times, desperate
mm.
prayers. And I remember months later, and this is after just lots of odd jobs and doing some consulting work, um, just like, just tell me what you want us to do, and we'll do it. And he revealed to my wife and I, he says, I've already told you,
Mm,
go and make disciples.
mm,
And then it's like, well, what gifts have you given us to do that? So we just closed on this house. It's a neighborhood. All these young families are coming in, and it says, you know how to run schools. You've run schools for 10 years and you're bilingual. What
mm.
if you just give those two gifts to these neighbors and make disciples of the families around you?
Wow.
So we knocked on this dead, dying Baptist church right outside the neighborhood. I think the best adjectives are it was moldy and tetanusy. And and just said, "Can we?"
Spiritually or physically?
Well, actually, spiritually, those who were left were prayer warriors, and they were
Oh,
praying for kids to come back in the hallways. And so I said, "What if we start a preschool here, bilingual Christ-centered preschool?" And the pastor pointed to a sticky note on the wall behind him. It says, "Praying for a preschool." And
wow.
so we did. We started in December 2014 with the mission statement that's absolutely the same mission statement. It's partnering with parents to inspire world changers through Christ-centered intercultural language immersion education. Jerry, those
Mm,
first months and years were difficult. Like God is still breaking me. Like I'm struggling with, do we have enough kids? Like we teachers volunteer the first month so I get paid the next month. And it's preschool. I didn't get my doctorate to lead preschool, but this
mm,
is my own pride, right? And God's breaking me through all of it. But little by little, he really started to form something very unique. And this is where we kind of get back to some of your original questions of here's a chance where we get to start a school from scratch. We're not trying to, change the inertia of the large ship. It's like, how do we want
Mm,
Christ-centered, the pearl of great price, uh, education? What is that going to look like? And then build it. And so we're 11 years in. Those original 2 and 3 year olds we just launched high school this year. So there are eighth and ninth graders. And God's been very gracious to provide a radically Christ-centered staff, continues to grow at a very predictable growth. Had almost exact same percentage growth every year except for this one year called 2020. And so we're over 400 this year. And yeah, I'm very grateful, but I just want you to hear like it's not this amazing vision. It's not all this incredible strategy. It's Jesus letting us be part of the greatest thing in the universe, which is his kingdom.
a part of one of the things that we, those who are familiar with our spiritual formation journey map, there's a bar at the top of that journey map, and it says the spectrum of maturity. And on one side, it says saved by grace, and on the
Mm,
other side, it says sacrificial obedience. And
mm,
if you look at it, the arrows are pointing in opposite directions. And so I was talking with one of our leaders. It's not something that we usually teach on. It's there. We just usually talk about the different four spots. But one of our leaders pointed out, he says, "Man, I love what you have at the top of the bar." And I says, "Man, you're one of the first people who have actually pointed that out to me and highlighted." I said, "That's actually really the most important part that we want to
mm.
highlight is we are all on our individual spiritual formation journeys. And the journey is always towards Christ wants us to be sacrificially obedient. Christ
Yeah.
wants us to
Okay.
do what he's called us to do at the end of the day." And I love what you said. And I just think this is worth drawing out that a lot of times Christ has to break us down to reform us, right? Because we're supposed to be
Yeah.
formed in the image of Christ, but we're trying to take all of this baggage in, and Christ is like, nope, that gets chopped off. Nope, leave that behind. Nope, don't need that.
Oh
I just
man.
need your heart, and I will show you amazing things just with you giving me your heart. And that's what I really hear in your
Yeah.
story. And so,
Yeah. I love that you highlight that because in movies you just see the highlights, but there's in real life I glossed over lots of struggles and it's him forcing me to sacrifice,
yeah,
but then proving himself trustworthy and good and again then he's the only hero in this. But I'd
absolutely.
love to kind of speak to then what are the these foundational building blocks look like.
Yeah,
It's both who we are and how we teach. And so the
yeah.
who we are on the faculty side and staff, like we really strive to be a highly diverse team.
Mm,
And I love that. I'll talk to parents on tours and just say, the first 7 years of your life are the most formative. And we'll
yeah.
talk about that linguistically and the language window and why we do multiple languages.
Uh-huh.
But it's also who you surround yourself with. What are we creating in the first 7 years of these kids' lives? They're normal for who their
Yeah,
neighbor
yeah,
is.
yeah.
And so that I'll say I want our school to look more like heaven and less like our neighborhoods. And
Mm,
we continue to strive both at who we hire, but then our families, the families we admit, and I love that. I love that. And not only a racial diversity, we also really want to invest in a socioeconomic diversity, and that's been a huge faith step for us is how to scholarship extravagantly and trust God to provide. And so we've been on that journey and been able to provide millions in aid the first 11 years and see God provide for all of that. So that students also are learn to navigate each other's social capital. And a lot of that came from my Vanderbilt training of how important it is to integrate students socioeconomically and students understand what we might consider implicit for our own little subcultures. You learn from each other these differences, and it's
right.
beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful.
And I know from firsthand experience when when a leadership, of a church or a school makes that a top priority, the the teachers or the leadership who are, I would say, administering that or providing that type of environment for the students, they really won't necessarily see the systemic long-term effects. The kids will. And
Yeah.
here is how I've witnessed it in my own life and the life of our friends, because we were a part of I mean, we I would say my upbringing is super special because I went to a large, multicultural, multi-generational church, like
Mm,
all of my life.
mm.
And
Which
it's
is
it's
so unique.
it's I'm telling you, it's so unique. And a lot of it was just part of it was being here in South Florida. A lot of the things that were happening politically, socially, economically in the area, where it was almost kind of like a tsunami that happened in the church, but where a lot of people were running away from that, my pastor began to embrace it and says, "No, the world is coming to us. How are we going to look different? How are we going to embrace what the Lord is doing?" But to those kids who are going through or who are experiencing what you are providing, it's going to be the normal for them. It's
That's
like
what
they're going to go up to people and it's going to be like, "Oh yeah, this is whoever."
Yeah.
And I know it's hard for people who've never really experienced this to understand. It's like you just want to know people's story, and you see them as human beings, not dismissing, their
Yes.
characteristics, but you genuinely want to see them as, know who they are and know their story, and you really truly prepare them to be ambassadors for Christ.
Yeah, a thousand percent. And we'll get into this, but a lot of what we're doing is preparing kids for that to be ambassadors, and that language and cultural barriers would not hold them back. But these first 7 years being so formative, if the only other kids and families that they navigate in your home, their homes, your church, your school, you've created a normal. And if they were
Mhm.
to step out of that normal, it's abnormal, it's
Yeah.
uncomfortable. And I strongly believe much of the xenophobia and racism we see in the low country, not all of it, but much of it is not an open animosity. It's just, hey, I don't know how to navigate you. I don't want to
Mhm.
mess up. So I'm just going
Mhm.
to avoid you. And it's like,
Interesting.
but that's still xenophobic or racist. Like, how do we authentically, humbly just bring
Yeah.
ourselves to engage with other people, right?
Yeah.
And so a lot of that really we didn't realize was formed subconsciously early in
Mhm.
our lives.
Yeah. I think all of us just being on this spiritual formation journey, there's a lot of things that we have to unlearn,
Yeah.
and I think that unlearning takes place, and I know most Christians would agree with this. I mean, truly, when we're staring into the face of Jesus and we're, when what came to my mind as you were talking was Jesus' parable, the that he tells, Matthew chapter 25, where it's the one with the sheep from the goats, and he says, well, the people respond back, "Lord, when were we serving you? When were we doing this?" And he says, "Well, when you served the least of these, you were ministering to me." And I think that when we truly desire to stare deeply into the face of Jesus, you can't help but lean into those uncomfortable situations, because I mean we know he leaned
Yeah.
into a very, very uncomfortable situation for us. So the least we can do is make ourselves vulnerable, for the sake of the gospel, and truly demonstrating love of neighbor.
I
So
love that.
yeah, I want to pivot. You're talking about your school is growing, and with every stage of school growth comes a different set of challenges. You mentioned that you're starting a high school. Man, praise God for that. I remember some of the earlier conversations we were having a couple of years ago, just praying through
Yes.
that. So I mean, I praise God with you just for where you are right now. But you know, training teachers.
Yeah.
We're in a You mentioned about a little thing called COVID taking place, and so I would say it hasn't just changed the education landscape. It's radically accelerated maybe some things that were taking place before
Yeah.
COVID happened. Things related to teacher burnout, teacher preparation, or the lack thereof. But what really drove me to say, man, I got to have Nathan on this podcast right away was you sent me a document on something you were working on, really trying to articulate truly how do we integrate the biblical worldview or into every part of the curriculum. And I was just like, oh my goodness, man, this has been a hot topic for a long time. But I wanted to, what made you start go down that road of reevaluating, what are we doing in every part of our curriculum? What
Yeah.
prompted that?
Yeah, thank you, Jerry. Our school has four distinctives. We're Christ-centered, we're intercultural, we're project-based, service-based learning, and then we're a language immersion school. And most of my teachers don't have experience in school settings in any of those areas. And so I
Mm,
had to think, how do we practically teach you project and service-based learning? How do we teach you to be an intercultural school? How do you do language immersion? But
yeah.
our foundational one is where we're going here is how to be a Christ-centered school. And to quote a Piper sermon one time, like we want our school to be more centered on Jesus Christ than the solar system is on the sun.
Ooh,
Like
ooh.
I imagine if you're touring my school, Jerry, and I say sometime during the tour, and you got your kids there, and I say, hey, don't worry. In our school, we talk about the solar system. Don't worry. We don't bring up the sun. We let each family figure that out at home. You would look at your wife and you'd be like, we need to go now. Because like hey, everything you're going to talk about in your school is
Oh, that's so good.
derived off life given from this ball of fire, right? Everything.
Mhm.
And how much more is everything in existence derived from the
Yeah,
triune God?
yeah.
And so, and we hire Jesus lovers who get that, but then how do you practically do that?
Mhm.
So we wanted to create a practical approach that's not overwhelming.
Yeah.
Um, and I think, a lot of us have been on our journey of, hey, it's not these trite connections of, hey, we're working with numbers today. Look at that. God numbered the stars. Isn't that cute? Yeah, but these authentic, like awe worship moments. And
Yeah.
so in our training, we just take teachers through some basic principles. We'll start by just saying we desire that each team member contagiously worships Jesus. And you know that because you see their fruits. And I remember talking with Bernard Gant, and that was big for him. It's all about the teacher in the classroom.
Yeah,
You
absolutely.
can't fake worship.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
but then secondly, we would say we want you to delightfully welcome each child into your classroom and start your class with a pleaful prayer. Start anything. If
Yeah.
I lead football, I start football practices, a parent meeting, I start parent meetings, teacher meetings, I start teacher with what we call pleaful prayers. And
Mm.
it's basically just saying, God, if you're not in this, we don't want to do it.
Amen.
If you're not in it, it's going to be done in vain. Like, please show up again today. And
Yeah.
then just end the class or practice with it with a thankful prayer. I I, I think that's a specific like tool to say, like, start this because one, you need to do it. And two, you're also implicitly training students, no matter what you do in life, you desperately need Jesus to
Right.
be in it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Um, and then, that we would study and memorize scripture. And so that's a beautiful thing, I think, ubiquitous across Christian schools that we're doing that. As we work through behavior management, we'll talk about, how to have standards, but also how to be a culture of grace. It's the last two areas I think I want to dig more deeply in. One I touched on is just service. So we do
Mm,
project-based learning, but we actually call it service-based learning. And our mantra from first grade on is it's real learning to serve real people with real needs. And
yeah,
so we
yeah,
we we work hard to find ongoing community or international partners at each grade level. So kids are developing these relationships and we're connecting the objectives of what they're learning, doing our best to connect it to a service that they're doing for others. And so that we're constantly asking the question, why are you learning this? You're learning this so that, right? So
yeah,
that you can go love your neighbor, which is so different than my education was. I was learning to be prideful. I was learning to get the good test score. I was learning to get the big scholarship. I was learning, it was all for me
yeah,
versus no, you're learning so that
yeah,
you can go effectively love your neighbor.
yeah. I and that is fundamentally the difference between information and transformation. You're familiar with our Flourishing Faith Index,
Yeah.
and it highlights that flourishing faith core where it's not just the head, it's not just the intellectual part. It's important, right? You need the right biblical data, if you will, correct, accurate biblical data of who God is, what God requires of us. But then it requires a heart change, right? There's the heart aspect. You want uh, what makes that knowledge most effectual is if the individual's heart disposition is such that it's like, oh yeah, I don't just know this, but I actually believe that it's true.
Yeah.
And then the
Yeah.
last part is and I believe this is what James gets at in his epistle, his letter, when he says faith without works is dead. He's saying, listen, we're not working for salvation, but the true manifestation that we have been radically changed and that we are true followers of Jesus Christ is we go and love our neighbor. And so what I love about what you're doing, it is we are practicing what Jesus has called us to do,
Yeah.
but you're threading it all through. So I like the fact that you said service learning is real learning for real
Yeah.
people. I love that, and what I hear is that you're fighting against and again I think we've inherited a century's worth of bad thinking and theology where we've separated, we call it the secular sacred divide, but
Yeah.
there's been a disembodiment where it's the intellectual side up here, but it rarely ever translates into exactly what God has called us to do. So I really appreciate that's just me re-articulating what I'm
Yeah.
hearing you
Yeah.
say. Yeah. And so in
Yeah.
terms of, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, so those first components I just shared. I feel like as long as you hire a Jesus lover, you can onboard that quickly, right? They're worshiping, they're delightfully welcoming kids in. We part of our core values, our CBA way, we call it the Hesed family. Like we shine our face on you, right? Just the way the
I
Father
love
does
it.
to us. But playful prayers in the Word, memorizing, culture, grace, serve. I think you can onboard any teacher quickly on that. I think that the last component, which is based off the document I shared with you, this is the component that you're going to refine your tool set over many years of how to teach from a biblical worldview. But if you can get those first six things, I feel like those are low hanging fruits. And then we could get you on this path that we can talk about some of these areas of what that worldview would really look like.
Well, I'm curious. I want to go back to you talking about hiring Jesus lovers. Are there a set of questions that you ask? Because I think that would be I think a question that many leaders will have. It's anybody can fake a lot of people can interview well, but are there a set of questions that you use in order to kind of filter through? How does that process work for you guys?
Wow. Yeah, you put me on the spot. I definitely would say I have some anchor questions, but definitely let the conversation lead, and you can see how their faith comes to life, both in the stories they're sharing, but their body language around it, right? If you get me talking about my Venezuelan princess, Jerry, I'm gonna light up. Like we have been married for 19 years and I am
Yeah.
madly in love with this girl,
Yeah.
right? You get me talking about my 4 kids. We talked before we started the podcast. I am
Uh,
going to light up about how my son's doing tackle football, my girls are doing these different things. Like I think that piece of how I light up talking and share some immediate stories, you're going to say Nate loves his wife. And I,
yeah.
I think it's more of that you're discerning in your spirit as you're meeting with the people as they do a trial class, as they then meet with your other teachers, as you do references. But I'm looking for an adoration that you can't fake.
Yeah, yeah. Now that's good. That's good. Discernment is key, and I would definitely agree with that. So
Yeah.
I want to highlight one area that really intrigued me as I was working through your document. Again, knowing you for the last few years, I wasn't surprised by anything that I saw. Deeply biblical, Christ-centered, spirit-led, God-glorifying. All of those elements are obviously there. But there's one area that really caught my attention that I think if out of all of the curriculum guides that I've evaluated over the years, this is one area where I was like, yes, this is supposed to be here, but it was still shocking that it was there. And it's this whole idea of suffering and justice.
Mm,
And just to
mm,
kind of set it up, I mean, in all of my studies of scripture, especially the Gospels in particular, or just looking at the both letters that Paul writes to Timothy, there's this theme of suffering is a normal part of the
mm,
Christian life, and so it's going to
mm.
happen. Hardship is going to happen. So I I just love to get your thoughts behind why that. We know it's in Scripture, but it seems radically different. It seems a radical thing to teach on
Mm,
suffering, to teach on.
mm.
We hear about justice, but it's radical. What were your thoughts behind putting that in there as a part of
Yeah.
your curriculum?
Yeah, I think to provide some context, so we're referring to a document I call the primer. And what I did as I'm training the teachers on biblical worldview, I want to give them very specific applications per content area. So we'll go through math and just really establish math is a language of God, and I
Yeah,
think the language he spoke in creation.
yeah,
And we'll talk about literature and just how we're made in the image of a relational God and how he uses story to relate. And we break that down on so many different levels. We'll take it through science, fine arts, just all the different content areas. But then, like you said, there's these threads that go throughout, and suffering's one of them. Recently, I was listening to a John Mark Comer podcast, and he referenced a robust study of 3 common elements when you see a life transformed. He talked about meditative practices, right? Being in the word and praying. He talked about confessional community. So being surrounded in community, but having authentic confessing, bringing things to light. And there I'm like, yeah, that's probably what, I would hear in any sermon. Then he got to the third component and he said it's suffering.
mm,
Suffering is required in the transforming of someone's life. And
mm.
interestingly enough, when going back to the interview question, my first interview question is always just tell me your Jesus journey. And I have learned to have Kleenexes because every time it's an authentic Jesus journey that's being shared, they
Yeah,
always talk about this breaking point,
yeah,
this
yeah.
desperation point. And then now the stage is set for Jesus to play the hero. I hope I was able to share a little of my own Jesus journey early on that people just say like, this is a Jesus glorifying story that he's doing. And
Right.
but I'm actually waiting for this suffering comment in my interviews. And
Mm,
because then okay, that was the foundation where God started to do transformational change. But then suffering comes out, right? It comes out in students' relationships. It comes out in their home lives. It definitely comes out in literature. And I think and part of
yeah,
this, primer is to train literature teachers how to identify suffering, how I identify the author's use of suffering. The cause of it, is it capricious? Is it providential?
Yeah.
How to understand its result in that, character's life, but then how to apply it with us, like, and opportunities here to really root, um, strong doctrine of God's providence, his sovereignty, like his good hand that causes good in everything for those who love him and are called according to his purpose. Um, and what we'll get into just talking about emotional resilience. And we know that kids right now, they have such little resilience. Helicopter parents and quick entertainment to drown out, the real
Yeah.
issues. And so it's like the tree blown over in the storm that had just little roots. And so
Mhm.
just understanding there's going to be storms. How do we
Yeah.
prepare you before and in the storms to root deep, to root deeply in the character of God, and then also in the community God gives you. It comes out strongly in literature as well as history, as well as in fine arts. And so that we would be intentional to identify the theme of suffering. And honestly, we still have work to do that better and better. But
Mhm.
we know our kids are going to suffer. And Jerry, this conversation ministers to me because I somehow subconsciously just still think there's a life of blessing right around the corner. And
Mm.
and what I need to recognize at my 47th year of life, what's around the corner? Is the same thing that's here today. It's called blessing and challenges. These
Yeah.
challenges
Yeah.
are going to push me to desperately need Jesus, and the blessings are going to be his wink to say, I'm right here. Stay next to
Yeah.
me. Walk in the Spirit. Don't leave me.
Brother, I don't know if there's anything else that needs to be said. I mean, just right after that, man, that is so good. I think what I want to draw out before I give you the final words to share with our listeners is just this process of discernment and discovery. None of us really have it completely figured out, but if just as you said, and I love that, man, I'm gonna take that statement for you. Hey, we're going to talk about the solar system, but we're never going to talk about the sun, man. That preaches right there. And I really think that and I believe this more and more the older that I get. It is just genuinely Christ wants to know, do we trust him? Does he have our entire heart? And I
Mm,
believe and when Christ knows that, man, he'll show us amazing things. And when he shows us those amazing things, we can't help but break out and say, yeah, man, Jesus, as you say, you're the hero, man. Jesus, you're the man. You're
mm,
it 100%. And when I
mm.
think about how God has just led you over these years and those hinge moments, and those moments of faith and those moments of God, Holy Spirit driving you to use your gifts and the opportunities that are right in front of you. 100% Jesus is the hero of the story. Man, final words, Nate.
Wow, thank you, Jerry. I'm grateful for this time. I do think another thread you see throughout this document is awe. Like we'll give a ton of examples of how to transform a math word problem from just, the flagpole shadow or Johnny's three apples to, hey, all these amazing things happening throughout creation. Take the
Yeah,
the monarch or the swallow or whatever, and just like lead kids to awe. We actually bought all of our teachers Louis Giglio's devotional book, and if you've seen his, how great
yeah,
is our God, an indescribable series of just like, oh man, and we saw in Artemis right now these astronauts just flabbergasted, flabbergasted, and I think
yeah,
that's it. Like man, if you're authentically worshiping Jesus, it's going to be contagious. And so, how do we just continue to put before kids and model? He's my pearl of great price, and he got me through
yeah.
yesterday's challenges. Look at these blessings, and I'm anchored in for whatever he's got today. And as you get ready for your journey, Jesus' journey throughout life, I want to walk you through that and making disciples.
Awesome, awesome. Nate, if school leaders want to connect with you and just learn from you, what's the best way for them to do it?
Yeah. Oh, please. I love it. Shoot me an email, njohnson at charlestonbilingualacademy.org. We try to keep our emails under 100 letters. And you know, we share everything. We built out our language immersion curriculum. If you're thinking about doing a language immersion school, we'll share it all with you. You know, I do have this primer. I'm happy to share that with you if you think that would be helpful. Yeah, we just continue to encourage each other. It ain't easy, but that suffering's part of our own transformation, right?
Amen. Amen. Well, Nate, thank you so much for joining the podcast and just praying that the Lord will give you an abundance amount of favor, patience, and discernment as you walk into this new season of starting a high school.
I receive that blessing. Thank you, brother.
Grafted Together is a presentation of the Association of Christian Schools International. Learn more about biblical worldview and spiritual formation at acsi.org/graftedtogether.